This week, Allan is out of town, but since when has that ever stopped us from bringing you a new episode of BSD Now? We have news, feedback, and an excellent interview with Brooks Davis telling us about Cheri-BSD that you're not going to want to miss. BSD Now, episode 139, Cheri-picking BSD, recorded April 20th, 2016. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Allan Jude.
Hey, I stuttered on that a little bit. I was trying to figure out the whole date thing again because technically this is for next week.
Yeah, this comes out on the 27th, but it was recorded on the 20th because on the 27th, I will be in Berlin, Germany, presenting at the Open Source Data Center Conference.
Oh, great.
With Benedict, who we interviewed last week.
See, so we keep it real here. We tell you what we're doing. There's no digital trickery where we're like, no, we're really here next week. But no, we're recording this actually right after last week's episode. But there is so much news to get to because the previous week I was out of town. We had basically 2 weeks worth of news accumulate.
Yep.
So it actually worked out, all worked out just fine. So this is going to be an action-packed episode. You'll have to stick around for it, but we should probably get right into it because there is a lot of news we need to go over here. So first up, we have an article about Unix's file durability problem. So I know you wrote the notes for this one, Allan, so tell us about it.
Right. So this is Chris Seibenman from the University of Toronto, and he writes a piece of software called dwiki, which is a Python-based wiki software that keeps everything in files instead of in a database. And he noticed that when the system hosting his blog crashed right after he had posted a comment, the comment was lost. Luckily, it was a comment from him, so we could just rewrite it. But he was like, that's not what I intended to happen. So he started digging into the Python code and looking at, and he's like, well, I would just open the file, write to it, close the file, and whatever. But it turns out that just adding an fsync wasn't always enough to solve this problem, especially depending on what operating system and kernel and file system you're using. So the post goes into investigating the right way to ensure file durability. But as you might expect, the answer is it depends.
Of course.
In particular, on some file systems like ext4 on Linux, if you do an fsync of a file, that makes sure that that file's written, sure. But if it's a new file and you didn't fsync the directory that the file is in, the directory entry might not get updated if the system crashed. And so now, sure, your file exists, but it's not in the directory, so it's nowhere. So the FSCK will probably just get rid of it or something. But the important thing is you won't be able to find the file even if it remains existing somewhere, and it'll eventually eat up space. So that's really confusing. But so he's like, well, that's really not expected that I would have to fsync the directory too. And I was like, do I have to do the parent of the directory as well? Do I have to go all the way back up to root? How does that work?
Yeah.
And it's like, what is fdatasync for? What does that do that's different? And then he talks in a related post to this one about using in Python 3.3, there's actually an os.sync function, which is like typing sync at the command prompt, and that syncs all data that's not written to disk yet.
Sure.
And it's like, well, you probably don't want to do that because, if there's also a database running or some other task running, you don't want to wait while it flushes everything. You just want it to flush this one little text file. More importantly, if it goes across all disks and all file systems. So if there's a second disk in your machine and it's dying or something and it's slow, or you're just writing a lot of data to it asynchronously, that means that calling sync could take 10 seconds or more, and someone's just trying to post a comment on your wiki.
That kind of kills performance.
Exactly. But he goes on and talks about a lot of it, and it's quite interesting. He says, one issue is that unlike many other Unix API issues, it's impossible to test to see if you get all correct and complete results. If your steps are incomplete, you don't get any errors. Your data is just silently sometimes at risk. Even with a test setup to create system crashes or abrupt power losses, for which VMs can make this a lot easier, you need uncommon instrumentation to know things like if your OS actually issued disk flushes or just did normal buffer writes. So you'd actually need to like have the VM running in some debug mode where it was actually showing you the commands it was sending to the actual virtual disk. And even then, the VM software often cheats and lies about fsync and so on. So that doesn't necessarily actually make this a good test of the API.
Sure.
And straightforward testing can't tell you if you're doing, or if what you're doing will work all of the time. Sure, it works in your example case of I write this command and then immediately power off the VM, but that doesn't tell me if it'll actually help in other cases. And they said because what is required varies by the different Unix, what kernel version, and what file systems are involved, it becomes really hard to tell that you're definitely always doing the right thing. So there's a second post. I think the second post actually comes first, but it was, how do I sync data in DWiki? But there's also a related discussion over on Hacker News, which got into some more of the details and nitty gritty of it, including talking about AIO, the asynchronous IO system, and how, this is a better facility because it gives you a callback. So you say, hey, write this data, and it tells you when it's actually done. The problem is when it's not actually clear from the API specification whether when it tells you it's done, is that equivalent to just, close, or is it actually f-synced? Right? And, a bunch of things like that. And then it goes on to talk about problems with using like ODirect on Linux and lots of other discussion. So it's definitely worth reading if you're interested in this subject. And then, one of the other things they talk about is, what you really want is like almost like a database where it's a transaction and either it happened or it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's what ZFS does. But the important thing about ZFS does is because it's copy on write, it means that if you were halfway through overwriting a file when the system crashes or the power went out or whatever, you get either your original file or the new file. You don't ever get
succeeded or it didn't.
You don't get the first half of the file being new and the second half being old and the entire thing being unusable.
Oh, is that what people still suffer with when they don't have copy on write? Gosh,
yeah.
So I had to do that in so long. I
imagine you had like a 1 megabyte file and you were writing in the middle. You were halfway through writing it and the power goes out. Right. You don't have the original. I know, but like literally, a lot of people don't realize you literally either have the whole in ZFS you either have the original version or the new version, but with every other non-copy and write file system, you have the two kind of mixed together.
And then you end up with corruption in your video or corruption in whatever it was you're saving.
Your database is completely unusable.
Yeah. Oh, that's cute. 2016 and people still struggle with that.
Yeah. And, no amount of f-syncing is actually, f-sync just lets the database know whether or not it had finished that. The database has to do a bunch of extra work to be able to roll back and undo that damage if it didn't finish. Mm-hmm. Basically, the database is providing kind of a copy on write thing of its own over top. To be able to go back. And ZFS basically gives you all that in your file system. It's very nice.
That is true. Okay, well, definitely check that out if you're interested in how file systems work and syncing, and of course, why you should use ZFS and not have to deal with a lot of these problems.
Yes.
Next up here, though, are you an OpenStack user? So we have a really good tutorial actually here, really detailed, talking about how to set up FreeBSD with OpenStack. Mm-hmm. So you should definitely check this out. But it looks like Remy Van Elst brings us this great walkthrough on his site on how to get it started. And it starts off, of course, with just a few of the pip commands. It looks like a lot of Python is going to be used here. But after you get your initial Python tools all bootstrapped and your environment set up, he next shows us how you save your OpenStack settings in a sourceable shell script, which comes in really handy before you're going to start adminning a particular instance. I can definitely see that. Other people should use that trick as well. That's a good thing to do when you're kind of changing instances. But next up, he then takes you through the Glance and the Cinder tools, which are used to upload the ISO to the target system, and then, of course, create a volume for it to install onto. So you'll have to follow along with that. Mm-hmm. And after that, of course, it looks pretty typical. There's going to be the usual steps of getting the VM started, and then the specific steps are outlined on how you get FreeBSD 10.3 installed into the instance. But it also includes some helpful tips. So if you run into like a mount root error, for example, and he uses the case of maybe you installed it and it was ADA0, but now you're using the virtual drivers, so VTDB is the disk now, how you would fix that, and then, of course, fix your FS tab so that problem goes away. Yep. So like a power user tip there if you run into that problem. But after the installation's finished, that's kind of your typical FreeBSD installation. After that's done, how you would prep it for Cloud Init is also demonstrated here. And then the resulting image ends up being compressed and is pretty much made available for deployment at that point. So we've stepped through some of the more gory steps here, but there is a lot of detail in this blog post. So if you're an OpenStack user or if you want to be, you should pretty much put this at the top of your must-read list. There is a lot of good information here, and I'm sure this is probably one of the better tutorials I've seen on anything close to this.
Yeah. And, like we said, the best kind of tutorials are the ones where it has some help to get you through the gotchas that you might run into.
Yeah, here's a potential problem we're aware of, and this is how you would work around that, which, makes sense. You're basically changing disk drives or disk drivers. So
if you built the image that you're going to use in VirtualBox or QEMU, where it's going to pretend to actually be a SATA hard drive, it's not going to be the same when all of a sudden you're using VirtIO.
That's right. So definitely check it out. A well-done tutorial, and we'd love to see more of them like this and of this quality.
Yeah, and the other great part is, more FreeBSD on people's cloud.
That's right. Okay, Allan, so tell us next about Undeadly and the HTTPS stuff that's coming. So what's going on there?
So Undeadly, which is the OpenBSD journal, is thinking of moving to HTTPS only on their website. And so there's two issues with that. The first is that in order to do this, they would like some help rewriting part of the code for the site. Currently, the site runs over HTTP and is using, the OpenBSD HTTPD and some CGI scripts. But if you log in to post comments, that actually happens over SSL, but in kind of a roundabout way. They have an instance of S-Tunnel running, which is back to a CGI app that basically just checks your password, and if it's correct, issues you a cookie, which then you go back to the regular non-HTTPS site and you have access now via that cookie. But if they want to run everything off HTTPS, that's not going to work. And so they'd like to properly integrate the authentication system into their code instead of kind of having this bolt-on separate thing, so that they can, use S-Tunnel or whatever and run the whole site over HTTPS. So they'd like to better integrate the authentication system and otherwise improve the code because it's a bit old now.
Sure.
However, there's also been some pushback questioning whether it makes sense to block users who can't make an HTTPS connection for one reason or another. There are a couple of countries that try to block that, or depending on where you work, they have stateful packet inspection or whatever. And so, personally, I think it seems perfectly fine to continue to make the site available over HTTP as well, and just try to default to HTTPS. Put in your HSTS setting, your HTTP strict transport, and so on, so that browsers always use HTTPS. And with HTTP strict transport security, it means that the browser will stop you from being affected by a downgrade attack. So I can see the value in possibly continuing to offer HTTP as well, because the point of the OpenBSD journal is to provide this information to everyone. So having a requirement that you have to be able to do HTTPS to read the site might not make sense. But there's a whole discussion about that in the comments if you're interested and maybe want to make your opinion known. There's also a discussion in the comments because when they released the code that runs the back end of the site, it had the definition of their secret salt that is used for the password file and a couple other things. And, the first person who found that thought that was a security issue, but there's an explanation of why, the salt is not actually, since it's normally included in the hash password, which the whole point is that if someone gets a hold of that, they still can't break the password.
Sure.
Although it does make one wonder exactly how the password file is set up in their thing, because it's obviously not using the typical, bcrypt or something of that nature if they have this static salt instead. So again, another thing that probably could be improved to have per user salts the typical way we do in, BSD password files, as opposed to having one site-wide salt and whatever type of hashing that they're doing now.
Okay.
But anyway, that's
still
one
an
of the
interesting discussion that they're having over there.
Yeah, you don't normally see quite so many comments on a story on Undeadly, so it's definitely interesting.
I mean, I get the whole desire for wanting to switch it all over to HTTPS, but
yes, having it available on HTTPS makes is very good
like
sense.
that's a no-brainer.
But HTTPS only is, there's not always a need for that.
Okay, well, we'll see what comes of that. Maybe see how that shakes out.
Yep.
Okay, well, next up, the FreeBSD Journal, the March-April edition has landed. And this time it's about teaching with operating systems. Hey, that reminds me of the TeachBSD interview we did with George.
Yes.
That's good stuff. So tell us about it, some of the columns in here. You didn't have one this month, did you, Allan?
No. I was too busy working on the ZFS book.
Yes.
and
yes.
I told him, I'm sorry, but Lucas will kill me if I give you something and don't finish the ZFS book first.
That's right. Need to get that stuff done.
Yeah. The next issue of the journal is here, and it's about teaching with operating systems. In addition to the usual columns like SVN update, talking about code changes that have gone in this 2-month period, the ports report, talking about what's changed there. There's a conference report from FOSDEM, somebody that went to, actually was the guy that organized the BSD dev room there, so you'll have lots of good insight. There's a meetup report from Ports Camp in Taipei, which is just a bunch of ports users and developers meeting up. So that was very nice to see. There's also a book review of the algorithm design manual and Drew's events calendar. If you want to know what BSD themed things are coming up, you should check out the calendar at the back of the magazine. Nice. But in addition to all of that, there was the regular set of feature articles, in this case about teaching. So we had the Teaching with FreeBSD through Tracing, Analysis, and Experimentation by George Neville-Neal and Robert Watson, as well as Cheri, Building a Foundation for Secure and Trusted Computing Bases with Brooks Davis, who we'll interview in just a minute here.
That's kind of convenient.
Yes.
That worked out.
Yeah. And then Kirk McCusick also wrote a brief history of fast file systems. So not just FFS, but all fast file systems, apparently. And then there's also an interview with Gleb Smirnov, who's a member of the FreeBSD core team, who's part of the release engineering team and is the deputy security officer, as well as a senior software developer over at Netflix.
So basically not busy at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
that's hoarding all the free time that the rest of us could love to have.
That's right.
But you can get the issue from your favorite mobile store. It's on iTunes, Android, and Amazon, and so on. Or you can get the desktop edition directly from the FreeBSD Foundation's website and read it in your browser.
Great. Okay. Well, definitely go check that out today. You guys should be reading that. Sounds like some good stuff. Okay. So, of course, we're going to be going to our interview next with Brooks Davis talking about CheriBSD, which was perfect timing with this last article. But before we do that, we're going to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean. Of course, the website for that, DigitalOcean.com. And you've heard us talk about this before, but you really should be trying to use this. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do by having a FreeBSD or a BSD instance somewhere up in the cloud where you can offsite some things. Again, I know I do my Mumble server up there. Email backup's a great thing to do. Quassel. So if you haven't run the Quassel IRC client yet, you're really messing out. But actually, that's how we do Slack now, too, for the office, because Quassel can go through IRC into Slack, and it's just really cool. But, of course, I run that off-site. So when I have these frequent power outages here, all the different users I have connected to it don't get disconnected, and I don't lose my IRC history. So definitely good stuff. You should check that out at DigitalOcean.com. Of course, use the coupon code FreeBSDNow, and that'll give you your $10 credit, where you can basically run the low-end VM, which is $5 a month for 2 months free. And that gives you a lot of time to set it up where you're not really paying for anything yet, which is pretty darn awesome. And of course, takes about less than 60 seconds to spin up a new VM, and they support FreeBSD just out of box. Somebody was asking me the other day, well, how do you set up jails in the VM? You only have one IP address. How do you do the NAT? It's like, oh, they have that in their FAQ. It's a couple lines of PF.
That's one of the things that really sets DigitalOcean apart from lots of other places where you can rent a VM is their tutorials. A lot of them are written by the community, but also by their own staff, because they actually have a staff of people that write tutorials. But they also have copy editors that actually go through and improve the content of them and work with the people that have the technical know-how to write the tutorial, but to improve the readability of it. And that makes a big difference.
It does. There's been times I've been looking for stuff that wasn't even necessarily related to DigitalOcean, and all of a sudden an FAQ shows up from their site or a tutorial, and it's like, oh, that's the info I needed right there. Something unpackaged, unrelated.
They also had a great guide. If you're a Linux user and you haven't used BSD much, they have a package management comparison tutorial that shows you, if you want to do this, you want to install a package, you want to do this thing with your package manager. This is how you did it in, Red Hat, and this is how Fedora, and this is how you did it on Ubuntu and Debian, and this is how you did it on Arch, and this is how you do it on FreeBSD. So you can kind of find the command that you want to do that, I know how to do this on Arch, it's this. So you find that command in the tutorial, and it tells you the matching command to do it on BSD. And it makes it really easy to kind of translate in your brain between what you used to do and what you want to do now.
That's just a no-brainer. Yeah. No-brainer. So definitely check it out today, folks. There's no reason you couldn't get signed up and start doing this. Of course, they have services all over the world. So if you want to store your VM up in New York, or I think, what was it, Atlanta, Toronto?
So they have New York, London, San Francisco, Toronto, London, Amsterdam, Germany.
Why was I saying
Singapore.
Atlanta? Do they not have one in Atlanta?
No, they don't have Atlanta.
Okay, sorry, my bad. Atlanta's the close thing here.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Think of that. Yeah.
But they also have IPv6 that you can get, and they offer private networking. So if you have 2 or more droplets in the same data center, you can get private network between them with unlimited traffic.
Nice.
Not that you were going to run out of that 1 terabyte of traffic that's included with each droplet, even the cheapest one, and then as you go up, you get even more. But it's nice to have that private network. If you're going to have your website over here and your database over here, then it really lets you do that. And then with the floating IPs, you can also have, say, multiple web front ends and then have them share a backend that is the database.
I think I keep saying Atlanta because I'm subconsciously hinting to them, like,
yes,
give me an Atlanta location.
Exactly.
That would be even faster for my mobile server. So anyway, go check it out today, folks, digitalocean.com. And of course, let them know you heard about it here on BSD Now. Okay, well, we're joined today by Brooks Davis, who's here as a FreeBSD software engineer developer. And hey, we're glad to have you with us today.
Yes, thanks.
So, of course, we're at Asia BSD Con, and you have have you already given the talk, or you're going to?
I've already given the talk.
Great. Okay, great. About Cheri-BSD. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment, but since this is your first time on the show, we have the opening question we ask everyone. Tell us your story. How did you get involved and make your way to BSD, I guess, originally?
Let's see. It goes way back to high school in the 90s.
Okay.
The high school I was at, David Greenman, who was one of the FreeBSD project founders, was running an ISP in Portland at the time, and he gave the school a router that could dial in. It was a floppy-based FreeBSD router based on like FreeBSD 1.0 or maybe 9.0.9, and so we also had some other Unix machines, not FreeBSD, but. Sort of got there. He gave me a bunch of CDs to hand out at some point for the 1.1 release. And let's see, from there, I mostly was a Solaris admin in college, but got back into it when I started my first job out of college. We had a test lab where we were using Luigi Rizzo's DummyNet quite a bit. And so I got back into FreeBSD, started hacking on network stuff, fixing whatever was annoying at the time.
What was the version of FreeBSD at that time?
That was like 2.2.
Oh, wow. Okay, still really early on.
Yeah. So yeah, we were using it more and more. Attended BSD Con in Monterey. And eventually submitted enough patches that people got annoyed and gave me a commit bit.
So just get him to shut up and commit his own darn stuff. I'm done.
Since then, I ran a FreeBSD computing cluster for HPC. We kept GPS satellites in orbit and things like that.
That's pretty incredible. So, give us a little bit about, I guess, what you're here to talk about. Cheri-BSD is, what exactly is it for somebody who's never heard that before?
So, Cheri-BSD is a fork of FreeBSD to support our research processor. So we've got a processor. It's based on the MIP64 ISA, and we've added some ISA extensions to give us spatial memory safety and some framework to do temporal memory safety. In relatively simple terms, what that means is in the purest mode where we make the most changes to the software to accommodate our changes to the processor, we eliminate buffer overflows. So we in fact are at the point where we can compile SSH, and that SSH should have no buffer overflows.
Wow.
If there is a buffer overflow, it will trigger a hardware exception rather than arbitrary behavior.
Interesting. Okay.
So that begs the question, is this a research CPU? Is this something that people will be able to buy eventually?
So this is our research project. It's funded by DARPA. We're about 5 years in at this point. And we're looking for transition partners. So we're working to get people to pick up the ideas in Cheri. We picked MIPS64 because we had a MIPS32 design for FPGA already. It was somewhere to start from. We're currently looking at RISC-V, the low-risk project, which is building an open-source RISC-V processor. They're going to include tagged memory, which is one of the pieces in their first chip. And hopefully we'll include Cheri, possibly in a second or third spin.
Okay.
But really the ideas should apply to any RISC CPU ISA. You'll make some changes in the process, but generally it should just apply.
Right. So you mentioned that's the most pure mode of the Cheri process, but you said in your talk you mentioned how part of the goal of this is to be able to take mostly existing software without having to build an entire new ecosystem of operating systems and applications.
Yeah, so one of our goals was to have a hybrid transition model. There have been capability systems in the past where each language object is represented by a capability, so they're unforgeable. You can't have buffer overflows. You can't access the wrong object either deliberately or accidentally. But they have all not had any backwards compatibility stories. So we think we have a really good transition story. So our CPU could run conventional MIPS binaries unmodified with no impact. The overall kernel changes are fairly small in general. And then there's a hybrid mode where we can take particular pointers in C and annotate them and say this pointer is a capability.
Sure.
And then it's bounds checked. And all use of it is bounds checked. And so there's this spectrum from unmodified MIPS code to a pure capability code where every pointer to every object is fully bounds checked, whether that's a pointer from malloc, something that the mmap is mapped into your address space, or something on your stack.
So I guess that kind of begs the question. You said kernel changes and whatnot. So assuming a processor shows up down the road, is this something where CheriBSD will just live on as specific for that processor, or does it get merged into FreeBSD?
The goal is absolutely to merge into FreeBSD. So we're actively merging things that are purely correctness, where code is working today because historical accident. And so we're making things more correct. So for instance, if we have a pointer and you want to manipulate it as an integer, maybe you're adding a flag to the bottom bit, which is done commonly in C++ implementations. If you're doing that now, the right way to do that is using the type int pointer t, which is a special integer type. Occasionally code uses long, for instance. That happens to work because they're actually the same thing on current architectures, but in Cheri, the Cheri variant of C, that's not true. So there's little correctness things. Once there is silicon in the pipeline, we plan to start merging aggressively.
So does that mean FreeBSD will be the first platform that runs on this, or is there any ongoing work on other operating systems?
We are concentrating on FreeBSD. It's plenty of work.
Okay, that's fantastic.
It is not an enormous effort to port to something like Linux. Porting the Linux kernel would probably be a challenge, particularly due to use of long in the kernel for pointer manipulation. But it's absolutely doable.
Right. That's pretty cool. So for the hybrid application where you're only manipulating some pointers, how much work is that is it kind of similar to Capsicum where you can take an existing application and just kind of move things around and pick it up, or? It
varies quite a bit. I did an adaptation of TCP dump where I made the packet buffer into a capability. TCP dump is probably the worst case scenario for that, just due to the particular coding patterns they use. So you have all these packet dissectors, there's 300 or something of them, and you start by annotating each function, and basically a process that I call pushing down, where I annotate all the top level ones, I recompile the code, and the compiler tells me, well, you just tried to convert a capability pointer into a regular pointer. And so fixing all that through, that was 5,000 lines of changes, so not a whole lot of fun. It could be maintainable, but it wasn't, it was not the greatest experience. For other things where there's a nice type def, For the thing you're trying to protect, you can just change the type def and you're done. So it really depends on the structure of the application. In general, because we have the pure capability mode and what we're calling Cheri ABI, which is a new system call layer,
Sure.
the easiest thing to do if you just want memory protection is just recompile. And I've got a branch of CheriBSD where I'm actually compiling almost all of FreeBSD that way. And the goal is to support both modes. Probably eventually we'll flip things around, in fact, and so we'll have a version of FreeBSD where the target architecture is, say, MIP64 Cheri, and then there'll be a FreeBSD 64 compatibility layer to run legacy unprotected binaries.
Interesting.
Could there be something kind of like you described with Cheri ABI, but for processors that don't support the extension? Like some way to basically run a Cheri application on AMD 64?
Probably not. It depends on specific instructions.
Right.
So you could, for instance, you could conceivably compile Cheri code with a new compiler, say, to support Intel MPX. MPX is probably more of a debugging framework, but it might be a good way for, say, Intel consumers who are developers to sort of keep themselves honest.
Sure.
But not something we've explored.
Or something maybe like a QEMU user mode or something that would implement the protections for
That's-
application?
Maybe a little slower, but
That's probably possible. It would definitely be slow. We do actually have a QEMU port of the Cheri processor, so you can run, you can download that off our project page on GitHub. And we're in fact using that to run our internal test suite automatically, part of our continuous integration process.
cool, nice. So you said 5 years DARPA's been funding this project. So how big is it exactly? It's not just you. There's
It's a major interdisciplinary effort. So we have architecture people, we have a compiler author, we've got some language experts, several operating systems people. So we're probably typically about 20 people, active staff, between SRI and the University of Cambridge.
Okay, so University of Cambridge as well. Cool.
So how long do you think it'll be before there's a physical process?
Before there's silicon, it's hard to say. Conceivably see silicon in a few years.
That is really cool. So any idea, I guess, targeted specs? Is this going to be for embedded systems, or are they going to scale it way up?
I think, well, our current work is all focused on 64-bit processors. The concepts probably are easier to implement. There's a little more extra space. And for some of the temporal memory safety, some of the things work better if you have more address space to work with. So you can do copy and garbage collection and things like that. So you can unmap set whole regions of address space and not reuse them for quite some time. Things like that.
And that really doesn't work on 32-bit, right?
Yeah, so we have some research work where we're starting to look at 32-bit address spaces and 64-bit pointers or capabilities, but that's a ways off. So I think probably the primary targets are both sort of a server space, but also phones and that sort of thing, because there's a willingness there for people to recompile all their applications. It's not this strong legacy environment where Intel has spent 30 years doing an amazing job of preserving backwards compatibility, and that's got a lot of overhead. So in an environment where people are fine with a new phone with some funky CPU on it, because the App Store or the Play Store just recompiles everything. In some ways, that's an easier model.
Interesting. So is that so big hardware and then phones and mobile, so if that makes complete sense.
You might look at something like pfSense would be a perfect place where it's fine, it's just another build.
Man, this is kind of exciting. We can talk about this now, and a few years later we'll look back and be like, the ground floor before the silicon arrived and everything. We'll talk about this. Any other questions you have?
Can you tell us a little bit more about the stuff you did before Cheri and BSD? You've been working on it a long time. What kind of things in the base system can we blame you for?
Let's see. Well, I guess to sort of try to walk backwards, one of the things I did when I first started on the Cheri project was the no root build stuff. So We wanted the ability to not have to give all of our grad students root access on our servers, that sort of thing. So I, brought in the new M-tree support, did the install stuff, and now that's becoming part of the packaging base infrastructure and leading into that.
And I use that to build images for my Wi-Fi router.
Good. So, prior to that, I maintained a lot of high-performance computing ports when I was doing that, ganglia cluster monitor, that sort of thing.
Sure.
Mostly just, scratching whatever itch there was.
Well, great. Well, hey, this has been fantastic.
So, other question we sometimes ask is what keeps you motivated to work on open source?
Let's see. I mean, it's fun. We've got a great community. I just, interesting challenges, and I like having my stuff be used.
Yes.
It's true. This is very true.
So, and I like to be able to look out there and say, we own the storage market. I don't have anything to do with that,
Right,
but we really work, and we're really out there all over the place. It's neat to think that this interview is streaming up through all sorts of FreeBSD devices as it crosses the internet.
That is true. I mean, how many years ago we wouldn't have thought Netflix and all the traffic they do would be coming from a FreeBSD box, and here we are. Well, excellent. Well, hey, for the website, what was the address where people can go and find out more information?
Let's see. So CheriCPU.org.
CheriCPU.org. Okay.
With or without an iPhone.
Okay, and that'll eventually end up at a GitHub repo or something?
That'll end up on our page at the University of Cambridge. And from there you can get to our GitHub project.
Okay, cool. Fantastic. Well, definitely you heard it there. Check it out. Okay, well, we appreciate your time today and spending time with us at AsiaBSDCon.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, folks, hope you enjoyed the interview with Brooks Davis, and look forward to seeing more about CheriBSD in the future. And I'd love to see some real hardware, because that just sounds really cool. We need to have that. But of course, we'll keep you updated on that in the future. So we have some more show to get to. We got news roundup, we got feedback, etc., and we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, our next sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems. Of course, the website for that, ixsystems.com/BSDNow. You want to go there and get signed up, get talking to these guys, and let them build your next dream system. So if you're a home user, maybe that's going to be a little FreeNAS Mini, or the bigger brother of the FreeNAS Mini, the XL, which is still just as awesome as it was an hour ago when we recorded last week's episode. And I'm still enjoying it. And of course, I'll give you more updates as we go along if any of that changes down the road and what my impressions are of it. But at the moment, so far, so good. It's just working and doing what it's supposed to do, which is exactly what you want in a NAS. It's perfect.
Yeah.
So, of course,
with that Intel Atom server processor, you still get ECC RAM and all the goods and IPMI. So you get the remote management, so you can power cycle it or take it over, whatever you need to do, without having to be at it. And
which is just crazy.
Well, it's really important when you're probably not going to hook a monitor up to your FreeNAS.
No. And we showed the picture last week. I don't have any monitors hooked up back there.
Exactly.
Why would
but using the web interface to the IPMI, you can fire up the console and, install the OS on it or manage it or fix the IP address or whatever you need to do without having to go find a monitor that you can hook up to it. If you're just off in the basement in a little room, you don't really have the ability to drag a monitor down there and balance it on the side of something while you're trying to type. It's terrible.
And you're sitting on the floor and it's annoying and
And
definitely.
The biggest advantage to the Intel Atom processor is it's only 17 watts. That means that the whole FreeNAS Mini XL with 8 hard drives is like 50 or 60 watts.
It's crazy. It's like less than an old school incandescent light bulb.
Yeah.
And surely you have enough wattage lying around to run something like that.
And it's quiet, and it probably gives off less heat than one of those light bulbs.
Yeah, it's quiet. I'm sitting here and it's next to an open door here. I don't hear anything. It just does its thing and it's over there trucking. And of course, put a lot of 3 terabyte drives in there and you got a lot of space, or even bigger. Do whatever you need to do. But dang, quite a cool little system. I predict they will be a hot item for this year. Maybe for the holidays, you need to get your family one. It just is a great little system. And of course, IX can build those minis, but if you're going all the way up to the big boys, the big brother of them, the TrueNAS boxes, I mean, those can be customized and built just about any which way. So when you call the folks or talk to the folks at IX, when you email, don't just say, I want to buy this. Tell them what you're going to buy it for. What exactly are you doing? Is this
I need a server that's going to do this.
Yes.
And we're like, what you actually want to do is use this kind of SSD instead of that kind of SSD and put this many NVMEs in it. And
Yeah, they'll get that all configured so you get the most bang for your buck, and you're not throwing money away at something that's not going to give you any ounce of performance necessarily. You want to put your money where it counts. And the guys at IX, because their sales engineers know their stuff, they can, oh yeah, we've already done 20 of those just this last week. Like, done. We'll help you get that set up. Easy peasy.
Yeah, and even the TrueNAS, which is like the highest of the high end, is only $160 per terabyte, and you can get up to 110 terabytes per rack unit. So a rack
crazy.
unit is this high, by the way. So
Just
you get like
crazy.
4 of those, you fill a rack with those, and 4 petabytes.
Yeah, isn't that what everybody has these days, right? Well, tell us about the three-peat. So I guess
Yes,
they won some awards here.
Yes, they got 3 awards from the DCIG because, the TrueNAS is really the best way to do it. But, they got the TrueNAS Z35, which is their all SSD one, got top of the rankings with a highly recommended. And they also had looked at the iSCSI SAN utility storage array buyer's guide. And that's where they also said, hey, that's what you want to buy. And they got and won 2 of the best in the business awards as well.
Well, that's fantastic. So, okay, with awards like that, definitely the next purchase your company is going to be making, get in touch with IX. Let them build the next system of awesomeness, which can go in your rack and you will be very pleased with because they are quite good. Okay, well, let's get into the news roundup here. So I know we had a little fun a few weeks ago when we were talking about the Ubuntu BSD thing that showed up. I guess it was on GitHub, or was this SourceForge?
I think it was SourceForge, yes.
SourceForge. Right? So we had a little bit of fun with that, but and we were surprised by it. But it looks like there's some longevity here and some goals, and it's actually pushing forward. So we have some news over on Softpedia.com that they are now seeking to become an official Ubuntu flavor, which is interesting. Like I guess maybe there'll be some legs to this project, but they've already released a 4th beta, so it looks like there's some current active work going on. But I wanted to just read you one of the quotes from one of the developers. He said, "I'd like to contribute all my work to the Ubuntu community, and if you think it's worthy, make Ubuntu BSD an official Ubuntu project like Xbuntu or Ubuntu," said John Bowden. "If you're interested, please let me know how you'd like me to proceed." So as of yet, we haven't heard that Canonical's responded, but it would be really cool if they made that like an official Ubuntu that's not even Linux. That's just wild. So we wish you all the luck with that. Hopefully that takes off and turns into something. But that is really neat. And hey, more people using BSD code under the hood.
Yep.
Yeah, we're good with that. So should be good stuff. Okay, so next up we have another interesting article, a blog post actually talking about the idea that it's all just bits, which is an interesting statement in and of itself, right? But the author is kind of taking us down this idea of no matter how old or mysterious maybe the code may be. I think he uses the example of network protocols. 20 years old, right? Nobody's going to touch that. That's magical black box stuff. Nobody knows how that works. But in the end, it's just bits being arranged in a certain way.
Yep.
Nothing magical about it at all.
Yep. We just
And
have
the
to
article-
make a packet that looks like this.
Yeah. So the article kind of transitions from that, takes us through the idea that old bits and bits that have grown too large should often be good candidates for replacement by simpler bits, maybe more secure bits, using OpenBSD as an example in this case. But one of the pull quotes from the article here, he says, the OpenBSD community exemplifies this in many ways by taking existing solutions and then simplifying them. Processing man pages is as old as Unix, and even in the 21st century, OpenBSD has taken the time to rewrite the existing solution to be simpler and safer. It's just bits that need to be turned into other bits. Similarly, OpenBSD has introduced doas as an alternative to sudo. While it doesn't replace sudo entirely, doas makes the 99.99% case of what people use sudo for both easier and safer. They're just bits that need to be authenticated. So I think all in all, a really good point that he's pushing forward here, and definitely a good read. And it reinforces the point maybe that nothing's really ever truly finished. And as computing advances and new technologies and practices are made available, sometimes it does make a lot of sense to go back and rewrite things in order to simplify the complexity that's, of course, snuck in over time as we have feature creep and patches get added. And next thing you know, what started off as this, and it's kind of time to go reevaluate it and maybe re-engineer for a better solution.
And it makes the point that needs to be taken in moderation as well. You don't want to be JavaScript and re-implementing every library every week.
Sure.
But, rather than focusing on things like JavaScript, maybe we need to look at things that do need to be rewritten, like Hadoop or web browsers, which have just had layer after layer after layer thrown on them as they've grown. Firefox was all light and fast and stuff back when it started, but you know,
You remember the day back when it was light and fast.
I remember Firefox. My first one I used was like 1.5 or something.
Or when Chromium wasn't like the size of a operating system. You know?
Yeah. And it's, you know, the infrastructure that is the core of Firefox was written a long time ago. And, you know, I'm not saying we need to throw it away, but it was designed when the web looked a lot different. And while we've added a lot of stuff to try to deal with that, just adding doesn't always solve the problem.
Yep. And I like the idea too that, you know, you see a tool in the base system that's maybe been there forever and you look at the man page and it's like added in 1993. Well, you know, that could still be a good candidate for replacement. There's a place for somebody to hack on that and say, okay, in 93 they did it this way, but since then technology's changed, security needs have changed. How can we improve it? And you can either expand onto it or maybe it's time just to do a rewrite, a clean room. But definitely a good read, and I would encourage folks to give that a spin, read it, see what they think. Maybe they'll have their own opinions on that. Okay, so next up, something really exciting, but a much requested feature for FreeBSD for both jails and VMs has just landed with experimental support in head, which is disk I/O limiting. So this is a good one. We have the commit. Link to the commit here if you want to go read it yourself and see exactly what it did. But the commit message is as follows. Add 4 new RCTL resources. You have read BPS, read IOPS, write BPS, and write IOPS for limiting disk and actually the file system I/O. And he says, note that in some cases these limits are not quite precise, but it's okay as long as they're within some reasonable bounds.
Yeah.
And testing and review of the code, in particular the VFS and VM parts, is very welcome. So they're basically asking for you to take a look at it, tear it apart, try it out, see what breaks and what doesn't. But either way, this is just a fantastic new feature that I'm sure is going to get incorporated into other tools.
Yeah.
I can already imagine it in IO Cage and Easy Jail and IO Hive and etc.
What it lets you do is limit the amount of data that can be read or written from disk, or the number of operations that can be done as read or writes from disk, per user, per process, per jail, and a couple other things like that. Currently it doesn't do per file system. It turns out that, was something kind of interesting, only really applies to ZFS. So
Sure.
you know, with UFS, maybe you have a couple of different file systems and it might have some use. The complexity of doing it basically would mean have to rewrite RCTL kind of differently to support it. So that's probably not coming right away. Although looking at the way it was done, it might be possible to do something ZFS specific that would actually be in ZFS and portable to every operating system, which now has me kind of interested in looking at doing that as well.
Well, definitely good stuff. So I know a lot of people have been waiting for that. Definitely give it a spin, report back any bugs so they can quash them in time for 11.0, and heck, just throw it on the pile of another cool thing that's going to end up in 11.0.
Well, with this and then the vimage fixes coming in, and if those are both land in time for an 11, containers on 11 will be a lot more interesting.
Yes,
a lot closer to actual, the full featured ones you got on Solaris, the zones.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
It's just nice to see those last couple of missing features between this. So, disk I/O limiting, the vimage stuff, so you got better networking, and then the System 5 IPC stuff, so you can actually have separate shared memory between your jails. That's kind of all the things that we're missing.
Yeah. All the little edge cases and the missing bits have been filled in now.
Yeah.
It's going to be a good year for releases. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, folks, we're getting towards the end of this week's episode. We got some BSD bits and feedback and questions, but before we do that, of course, the last sponsor this week, which is going to be TarSnap, the website, of course, tarsnap.com/BSDNow, where you want to go get signed up and start doing your backups. I mean, I know we tried to tell you earlier in the year, make it a New Year's resolution. Okay, it's April now. Like, what's the deal? If you haven't done this yet, like, you're really messing out. Go in there, put a couple bucks in there. Start with $5 or something. Really cheap.
Just $5.
Right? You'll see how far that lasts you, especially if you're doing data that's not changing a lot. You want to be backing up things that are important to you, things like, your tax records and your business records and just family documents.
That source tree that has all those patches that you keep promising to commit and are someday going to lose because your laptop SSD is going to die.
Yes, or you drop your laptop and bad things happen. stuff happens, right? So definitely get signed up with TarSnap today. I mean, if everything's encrypted, if you don't have your key, like nobody can retrieve your data, which is a feature. So you don't have to worry about somebody on the remote end snooping and seeing your data, or a disgruntled employee, leaking it or allowing the FBI access to it, or whoever it is. I mean, Russian groups, you name it, any groups, your typical hacker suspects, right? You don't have to worry about that. They don't have your key. It's all on your side. Everything that leaves your box has already been encrypted and Colin and nobody can, kind of pry that out of them. No rubber hose treatment will work in this case. So definitely, use TarSnap today. And of course, they have clients for just about everything under the sun up on the website. But the good news is you don't even have to use a binary. If you're really paranoid, the source is available. Compile it yourself, audit it, have your company audit it, check to make sure it does exactly what it claims to, and then start using it. Trust us, you'll thank us later when you actually do have that hard drive die or system gets lost or stolen or whatever.
Because it's not if you will lose data, it's when.
It's just a matter of time, right? Hard drives have an infinite life.
If you've never lost data to know the fear, it just means you're more. It's coming up to being your turn.
Yep, that's right. So don't take chances. Go ahead and get signed up with TarSnap today. Okay, so Beastie Bits. So first up, we have another Softpedia article today talking about PCBSD 10.3 is now the last in the series.
They interviewed some guy named Chris Moore. Who's that?
What? Who is that guy? I don't know. What is this? I don't know what's going on. Oh my gosh. Where am I? Okay. Yeah. So little thing here, but anyway, 10.3 is the last in the series, and PCBSD 11.0 will of course arrive later this year, which will probably be close to around the time FreeBSD 11.0 releases.
Yeah,
we're going to try and do it the same day if we can.
September-ish?
Yeah, September-ish is kind of the rough timetable at the moment. Of course, it's going to be completely dependent on where FreeBSD lands with that, because we can't announce it before they do. So anyway, of course, we have our current images. So if you want to start playing with it right now, you can start doing that and start grabbing these new changes we keep talking about that are landing in 11. You can get them ahead of time. So next month's image will be in a couple weeks, and you'll want to give that a whirl and give us feedback so we can make 11.0 PCBSD just as awesome as FreeBSD 11.0 is going to be. Okay, so the next Beastie Bit, what is this? ASLR is now on by default in NetBSD, it looks like, in AMD 64 specifically.
Yeah, they don't actually have the diff, just the commit message, but
it's just on.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting, with that happening there and the ASR stuff happening in FreeBSD and so on.
Okay. So next up, we have some Dragonfly news. It looks like a fix for hangs on Bay Trail has landed. It looks like there's a post here, a follow-up about a story on Phoronix, about Intel Linux Bay Trail fail. And he has a link to the Linux kernel, the actual commit that broke this.
Yep, and they basically have the fix, and it's he says, I'm running with my Bay Trail system for weeks now with C6 and C7 enabled, and without a single freeze. Previously, it was freezing at least every second day. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, also, as we wrap up the Beastie Bits here, don't forget, we mentioned it last week, but PGCon is coming up. Don't forget about that. If you can make it out to that, do so. It's at the same place BSD Can's held. It's just in May.
Yep. So, May 17th through 21st.
Yep. Go to the website, get signed up, and make a point to be there. You'll love meeting with your fellow Postgres users and developers.
Yeah, they have, if you're a user, the tutorials are on the 17th and 18th. If you're a developer, on the 18th, they actually have an unconference for developers. Then they have the regular series of talks on the 19th and 20th. And then on the 21st, there's a users unconference. So no matter if you're new to Postgres or old hat, there's definitely stuff for you.
Something for everybody. And speaking of conferences, don't forget, get your paper in for EuroBSDCon 2016. The deadline is May 8th. So by the time you're seeing this episode,
you only have like a week and a little bit. So
yeah, that's creeping up on you. So you need to get that done, get it turned in, and that'll include your trip out to Belgrade, Serbia. So check it out. And of course, we'd love to see you and hear your talk out there. Okay, so it's time for feedback and questions. And we're going to be starting today with John, who writes, and he says, quick question, my Google Foo is failing me on. And I know you replied to this already, Allan, but we wanted to bring this out to the audience as well, because other people may have the question too. He's asking, how do I delete multiple data sets with the same prefix in a single command? He said, I have other data sets I need to keep, and I'd like to blow away the whole, or I would just blow away the whole volume and start again. But then he lists the example of they all have a common name like foo in them or something. So he would expect to do ZFS destroy -r slash baz slash foo or whatever, and it doesn't work, of course, too many arguments. So tell us exactly how you recommended he fix that.
In particular, when you just use a star in the command line like that, your shell is going to expand it looking for files. So it's not actually going to do what you intend. And the ZFS destroy command only takes one data set as the parameter. So if you give it 2, it will throw an error. To actually delete 100 data sets at once without using recursive mode, you would need the ZFS channel programs feature, which isn't finished yet. But there's work to be able to build a thing to do that. And basically, you'd write a little script that would go through and do that. But ideally, when you had created these data sets, if they all had the same prefix like that, you would have actually created a parent data set and then put all the children that were common under it. And then you could just do it. But otherwise, you're basically going to have to delete them one at a time. And it's fairly easy to do a shell script to do that. But as you can see from the...
I've done it with xargs. Just, done.
Exactly. Because with xargs, you can tell it, only put one data set on each output line, and it'll run the command once for each data set. But yeah, ideally, when you're creating the data sets, you put them into logical groups so that, you can just say, hey, destroy, pool / foo, and then that kills pool foo bar, pool foo bang, pool foo fizz, etc. Because each destroy is a full operation on ZFS, it can take a second or two each, but that's what happens when you create too many data sets, I guess.
Cool.
But in general, it should be fine. Sorry, it's an easier way.
No problem. So next up, we'll go to Thomas, who writes in. He has a really long email telling about his background going into BSD and running Tor relays. And so we'll skip past a little bit of that down to the bottom where he asks some questions, though. And of course, you can read the whole thing online if you would like to. So thanks for writing that in, Thomas. I did read it through it all. It is pretty interesting, your usage of Tor there. But he has some questions about the Raspberry Pi specifically. He said, when do you think upgrades with FreeBSD Update will work on Raspberry Pi images? My answer is probably never.
Yeah.
Because that's going away.
FreeBSD Update will be replaced with package base, and the idea is that will happen for FreeBSD 11, which will come out in September. So hopefully the answer is in a couple of months.
Yep. Okay, and he said some ports seem to display important messages when they're done installing. He said, I'm always kind of afraid I'll miss any of those if I use anything beyond the standard make commands. Any ideas where to look for this documentation elsewhere? I think there's a PKG command. You can show that.
Yeah, I think there's a package command that will show it. But also, if you if you're using ports tree, if you look, there's actually a PKG-message file. Then that's what's actually being displayed to you. And so you can actually see that message anytime. But yeah, I think if you look at, I forget what the subcommand for package is, but it is, there's a way to get it from the installed package as well. Because a bunch of those can fly by at once. When you run package upgrade and it's upgrading 500 packages, the messages for a couple of them will definitely fly by faster than you can read them.
Yeah, they do. So his next one's kind of a longer question, but he asks essentially when you're building Tor relays like he's doing, he wants the security updates immediately. He's wondering why it takes a few days, or the packages lag behind a couple days usually.
Well, they used to be more than a week, and now it's only like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah. He's wondering if the FreeBSD security team could offer immediate package rebuilds, or perhaps they're doing this already. I don't know. I think a couple days is still pretty good.
Yeah, there's more and more work on making incremental updates faster so that instead of having to rebuild the whole package set, which takes around 20 hours on a really fast machine that they use in the cluster, to be able to do them more quickly. Of course, the problem is it's hard to tell. Well, it's the dependencies, but also the ports tree changes all day, every day. And so it's, you can't just say, I want to build the newer version of the Tor stuff and maybe its dependencies, but I don't want to also pick up the fact that, oh, there was a new Firefox release and now I'm going to have to build that and it's going to take 6 hours.
Well, part of the problem is, too, depends on where the vulnerability was. If it's in LibreSSL, or we say we update LibreSSL, well, that's 12,000 packages I got to build now, right, to offer those packages. So there's still going to be some value of time where it's like, okay, this update just broke or changed half of the tree, has to be rebuilt now or more, depending on how low level it was. So
I wonder if there's a way, though, you could actually hook up package audit to a Poudre. So it would just rebuild any package recursively that had a known vulnerability for VU XML.
No, that would be interesting.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. And another interesting one was that, this is on OpenBSD, binary updates like this are actually a third-party service offered by somebody. So if somebody decided that they had a way to build these FreeBSD security package updates faster, they could build that.
You could always just switch your repo to that.
Yep.
So he also asked, he noticed that FreeBSD doesn't have a ASLR, a security feature. And he just mentions that Harden has that, etc. So he said, what's up with the lack of that? Well, I think it has started landing in current.
There's
another alternative.
There's an alternative one done by another FreeBSD developer, and there's a patch for that you can try. But I personally don't know that I know what the value of ASLR really is now. 10 years ago was interesting, but
one of the last discussions we had, I think, in the Dev Summit was you need it for marketing purposes, but as far as like real world usefulness, not so much. I don't know.
I don't know. I've been using FreeBSD for 15 years, and I don't know when it would have ever made a difference for me. It's not saying that we shouldn't do it. It's just I don't know that it's that big of a deal or why people are so fussed about it.
Well, it sounds like it'll probably land in 11.0 would be my guess, this alternative implementation.
Yep.
Okay, well, next up we have a Ben. You want to read this one here, Allan?
So Ben writes in about ZFS again. He says, thanks so much for the great show and highlight of the week. After 8 months, you've helped me get closer to the community and become more excited about FreeBSD. A few weeks ago, I upgraded my FreeBSD 10.2 server up to 10.3, but I did the upgrade on a new boot environment and was pleasantly surprised to see it worked. It was a feature of OpenSolaris I loved back in the day, so it was really nice to have on FreeBSD. He says, I was talking with a friend about the upgrade, and we were commenting on how the boot environment allows you to roll the system back should an upgrade go sour. Then my friend asked, what about your data? What happens if you notice an odd update quirk a week later and you switch back? So rollback is probably the wrong word there, because a rollback, you would actually destroy the newer data. With because you're not just rolling back to an older snapshot, you're actually using a clone of that snapshot. You can keep both the old version and new version intact, so you can copy files between them. He says, a quick look suggests that the boot environments only snapshot the root file system, and other ZFS datasets are untouched. That's correct.
That's by design.
Yeah, they purposely, like USR and var are actually fake datasets by design so that all the files fall through into slash. But, your PCBSD and FreeBSD user local is also part so that you can roll back package updates that go bad. But your home directory is a separate data set that doesn't get this treatment, so that when you roll back to the 10.2, the files in your home directory don't suddenly disappear. He said, I commented that since ZFS was cheap, you could afford to have lots of these snapshots and so on. But he asks about moving files between different data sets. So he says, this got me thinking, if two ZFS datasets are in the same pool, sharing the same storage, and you move a file between two datasets, why does it take so long? There's kind of two parts to that. The first one is, for example, the move command in BSD, or all operating systems, the first thing it does is check, is this the same file system? If it is, then it just uses the rename system call. But if it isn't, it copies all the data to the new file system and then removes it from the old file system. So because ZFS presents these as different file systems, that you get this effect of you actually have to copy the data and then remove it off the old one. But because of the way ZFS works, those blocks are actually associated with the certain file systems, so there isn't a way currently to just move a file from one data set to another. Partly because, because it would break the snapshots. The snapshots can't have those blocks suddenly disappear or suddenly be part of a different data set. So, one of the features on the to-do list is a way to clone a file, an individual file, And although I think that would still be inside the same data set, not cross data set. But there's some interesting ideas there for development in the future, but currently in ZFS, if you want to move a file from one data set to another, it actually requires moving it rather than just renaming it.
Just like multiple partitions.
Yeah, same thing as if you had two partitions in UFS. And so, yeah, he says, do ZFS data sets have boundaries similar to partitions? Yes, they're completely separate file systems. There's like non-shared inode numbers and so on. And so, yeah, that answered his question.
Cool. Okay. Well, next up we have Bryson who asks about a follow-up to the SysV IPC. He said, on another episode you had a feedback on SysV IPC and Postgres in jails. The issue gained some popularity on the mailing list recently as Brian Cantrell gave a talk about the history of jails and zones and the academic papers that go along with them. It's a fantastic talk, not just because Mr. Cantrell is an excellent speaker. I recommend to anybody who's interested in containerization or jails specifically give it a watch, and he has the link here. But he says more specifically, Allan responded to feedback that he believed Postgres had removed SysV IPC from the latest versions. He says, I can't find any mention of this. If you have a specific reference for this, please share. Meanwhile, the two following bugs have been filed and are now in progress to get jail-specific SysV IPC implemented. The comments appear hopeful that it'll land in 11. Then he has a link to a couple of the bugs.
Yeah.
So thanks for the great show.
So when I looked a little further, it looks like they reduced the amount of SysV IPC it needs. So it's only, I think, a couple of megabytes or something. So it still uses SysV IPC, but it's not using it for your actual database or anything. So it doesn't require a lot of it like it used to. So in the newer versions, they use a lot less of it, but you still need it. And yes, so there's these patches that hopefully will provide the isolation between, although I've seen some discussion about not liking the exact way it was done, but it does seem like it'll work, and we'd rather get that for now and maybe change it again later than to ship 11 without this feature, because it's much needed by people that want to run Postgres multiple times without having to do odd UIDs or something to separate them.
Sure. Okay. Well, next up is Drin, who also has a follow-up. He says, first, I'd like to thank you for discussing the question on the show and those who wrote in response. He's talking about IPsec here. He said, it turns out that in order to get the IPsec client working, I had to enable both IPsec and the IPsec_nat_t in my custom kernel. Allan mentioned that IPsec will be the default in 11. He's wondering if this will also be true for IPsec nat_t.
I meant to look that up in the default kernel in head and see, and I didn't. I don't know the answer to that. But if you look in SVN in the generic kernel in the head branch and see,
then you can have your answer right there, I guess. I can look it up really quick and find out. But sysconf generic AMD64 IPsec. IPsec is enabled, but I don't see the nat_t yet. So maybe we need to put a request in for that, but he also mentions that doing FreeBSD update reverts to the generic kernel, and yes, that is a total pain. And part of the reason why switching to package base may fix that, because now you can have a different kernel, and when you upgrade packages, it won't do that anymore. He said, "Is there an easy way of managing updates when using a custom kernel?" Yeah, that's going to be the package stuff. And should I consider switching to kernel on my laptop? It wouldn't hurt. A lot of us are doing that on our laptops. Definitely good stuff. He said we heard it mentioned on the show that running current is reasonably safe, but I'm still deterred somewhat by the warnings on the FreeBSD site, specifically that the snapshots are primarily for testing purposes and not fully tested compared to the releases. Well,
right.
That's true. You're on the bleeding edge.
Yeah, the snapshots are generated basically automatically, and they usually make sure they boot, but they don't get the 4 weeks of exhaustive testing that a release will get.
Sure.
So I'm not saying you shouldn't run it. It just means there's a chance there's a problem, and you would have to go back to 1 week's older snapshot or something. It's
just be
it's
open
not going to
doing
be
a little
crazy.
more manual work if something breaks or whatever. But anyway, well, thanks for writing in, and we'll have to check and see about that other IPsec option. Maybe that will get turned on.
I'll have to poke George about that, because I know he's the one that switched the default there.
Okay. Well, cool. As we close the show, of course, feedback at BSDNow.tv. That's your one-stop location. Send it all right there. So if you have questions or comments, send it in. We'll get it in on a future episode. Don't be alarmed if we don't respond via email right away. A lot of times we'll just sit on it and wait and answer you on the air, which is more fun for us.
Yep.
Of course, if you have show ideas or topics, or if you find a story floating around the internet that you want to share that maybe me and Allan haven't seen, or maybe we have seen it, just send it in anyway to make sure that we get a note of it. We'll try and make sure that gets mentioned in a future episode as well. So, of course, thanks for being here this week. We'll look forward to speaking to you same time next week.